Part 2, Chapter 11. So, we talked about kind of human nutrition as a whole. And so, now what we're going to talk about is we're going to move into agricultural practices. So, the Green Revolution is a big concept in all of this. And so, the Green Revolution is this idea that kind of started in the 40s where people really started to, scientists, agriculturalists, farmers, they started looking at new ways to look at agriculture and approach it, right? So different means of fertilization, irrigation, getting the most bang for your buck whenever it comes to crop efficiency and output. So the Green Revolution is very important because without it, we would still be in the dark ages, just, out there with our till, planting a seed, covering up with dirt, watering it. Yeah. So the Green Revolution, there's a lot of components to it, and a lot of what we're going to be talking about from this slide on relates back to this. One thing that we have to be aware of in agriculture is irrigation. We know that plants have to have water, and depending on your crop, it needs varying amounts of water. Well, you can water too much, and this is actually just as bad, if not even worse for the plant than if you don't water it enough. So if the soil remains way too wet underneath the root system, then what can happen is it can become moldy. It can basically prevent those roots from reaching down further down into the soil. But it also impedes the oxygen that gets down to the roots for different reasons as well. The soil gets compacted, especially if it's a clay-based soil. So there's a lot of different things here that waterlogging can lead to, which are not necessarily good. So too much water can be bad. Another irrigation problem that sometimes farmers come into, especially along coastal regions, or if they use a lot of fertilizers, is salinization. And salinization is where you have some salts that get into the irrigation water or kind of seep up out of the ground. And what happens is as water evaporates naturally from the soil as it does, then it leaves behind the salt that either came up or was provided through the irrigation. And then that salt sinks down into the soil and it can strip moisture away from the plants. Also, salt can change other chemical structure in the soil itself and then seep nutrients away from the plants as well. So salinization is also bad news. It can be a problem. Here's another picture that kind of shows you the two. The top one here is showing you some salts that are dissolved in the water from the irrigation. And what happens is those salts are left behind once the water evaporates, just to kind of recap. And then in the waterlogged picture at the bottom there, you are going to see that it's just way too much water. Either one, it can't evaporate fast enough to benefit the plant, or two, what also can happen here is that if there's like too much, if it gets compacted up on top, the water can't evaporate. It has nowhere to go. And then that's going to prevent the oxygen getting to some of those roots. And it's just not going to it's not going to produce healthy plants. So we also talk a lot about fertilizers. So there's going to be debates all, coming up for decades as to should we use fertilizers? There's organic fertilizers. They are better or they are not as good as inorganic or synthetic fertilizers. So, but before you can even have that conversation, you need to know what they are. So organic fertilizers are based from organic matter from plants and animals. So animal manure. And usually these are going to be rudiment type animals. So ones that chew cud and are primary level consumers. They are only eating plant matter, or plant matter that has been worked into compost. That could be an organic fertilizer. Synthetic fertilizers are ones that are produced in factories, made up of nitrates, phosphates, that kind of stuff. And basically the big difference here is, as you see in the picture, in an organic fertilizer, it's meant to feed the soil. So that organic matter is like worked into the soil, which then benefits the plant. Whereas synthetic fertilizers are added to specifically go straight to the plant. So organic fertilizers are thought to possibly enrich the soil better over the long term, whereas synthetic fertilizers, once they're not used by the plant, can seep out and then get washed away. All right, so let's talk about some different farming practices related to all of this. Whenever you drive, if you've ever driven between like here and I don't know, Chicago, somewhere through the plains, you will see monocropping. Monocropping is where you have big fields all dedicated to one crop specifically. And monocropping it's common because it's easy. It's a lot easier to take your combine, throw down, a lot of seed that's all corn or cotton or whatever, water that, use one combine again for the harvesting of that one crop. So it's more efficient in terms of cost, but it can also be problematic because once you go through and you pull up all that crop, then you're exposing all that soil to nothing. It's more likely to be eroded. But also, as a long term, it's not as good for the soil because you are removing the same nutrients from the soil over that large area, year after year after year. So that can also reduce productivity. And also, you're basically, look at this picture, there's no trees. There is absolutely no habitat availability for other organisms in these areas because it's all been converted to cropland. Pesticides. So pesticides, fertilizers help and benefit plants. Pesticides get rid of the pests, right? Side means die or kill. So a pesticide is a substance, usually a chemical, or it could be an organic substance that is used to get rid of a specific pest. So there's different ones. Insecticides, guess what they do, guys? They kill the insects. Herbicides go after certain plants like weeds, dandelions, that kind of stuff. Rodenticides, that's if you have mice, rats, that kind of stuff. Moles. Fungicides target fungi. This is tended to use in crops such as like corn. If sometimes corn can get like a fungus, a fungus that grows between the kernel and the silk. And nematodes, which target worms. And yes, like we're not talking about necessarily earthworms. We're talking about some of the other bad worms that may be like a larval form of something that could later become into an insect, but they can deplete the soil. All right. So pesticides, there's a lot of types, but whenever you go to the store and you need a pesticide, it's going to say broad spectrum probably because that's going to kind of appeal to the everyday person here. They're going to kill all sorts of different things, probably, spiders, ants, bugs, wasps, whatever. Those are the more common ones that you're going to find like at Home Depot. Selective pesticides may be used to target a specific species or a kind of critter that you don't want around your plants. So selective pesticides do tend to cost more also. They are not in as great of demand. There are persistent pesticides, which stay in the environment for a really, really long time. So DDT is an example of this. And then there are non-persistent, which they break down pretty quickly. They don't have a long, the reaction time is pretty fast. And so, like you spray Roundup, if it rains, that stuff's gone. It washes off. So that is what we call a non-persistent pesticide. Okay, big topic. Okay, big topic alert here. Okay, woo, siren. Okay, bioaccumulation. Bioaccumulation. Just think of what the word accumulate means. Accumulate means to gather, to come together, right? If you accumulate money, right, you gain it over time. So bioaccumulation is an issue where sometimes pesticides can build up in an organism over time. Usually it occurs kind of in the fatty tissue. DDT was a huge issue with this. And let's say a bird eats seeds that were grown on like a wheat crop or something like that, that bird, if they used a lot of a pesticide year after year after year, that bird is going to accumulate that pesticide in its system over the long term. So it builds up that concentration, and then it's obviously poisonous. So something I want you to keep in track here is that in bioaccumulation, it's in a single organism. So in this picture here, this is a fish. It's showing you that as these three fish have grown and matured over time, same fish from juveniles to adults, they have been exposed to a chemical that has built up in their system. So that's bioaccumulation. Pesticides, a little bit more about these guys. So pesticides, organisms can also become resistant to them. And as they become resistant, it's because they are under those organisms are undergoing mutations, so that way they can naturally select themselves to become successful in that new environment, right? That's just basic science. But it's bad for farmers because then those bad little bugs, the chemical that they used to spray them with doesn't work anymore. So they have to come up with another plan. So resistance is futile. I hope you get my joke. But resistance, what happens is it's like the flu vaccine. You get a vaccine every year that's a little bit different based on what is, the current strain out there. So they can kind of change their formulations a little bit, the chemical companies, to kind of formulate, hey, this tends to work a little bit better. Let's put this out on the market. And then what happens is we come up with what they call this treadmill. It's like a cycle where resistance occurs. Companies have to come in and develop a new formulation of it. Then there's a new resistance, and then we just wash and repeat. All right, I'm going to stop there for section 3.